One moment. Okay, and good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the North Clackamas Chamber of Public Policy Government Affairs monthly meeting. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and especially our distinguished panel of water professionals. And everybody will be introduced to you in just a moment. I'm Laura, your chamber CEO. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. Just a friendly reminder, please keep yourself muted. We will have a Q&A session after the initial presentation is over. So if you have questions, raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. And if it's a long question, then we'll just go ahead and call on you to ask the question specifically. And if you have a specific question for a specific panelist, you can specify that in the chat box as well. Want to start by saying and thank Shelley Perini for corralling everybody and putting this together today. And most of you know Shelley, but Shelley is with Water Environment Services and is responsible for leading WES's business and community relations efforts. So thank you so much. And Shelley has been a past board member. She's also actively engaged in our Women in Leadership professional programs here at the Chamber. So thanks so much for your continued engagement, Shelley. Also, we want to make sure that, hang on, I'm multitasking. Just one chamber announcement, the golf tournament's this Friday. So if you plan on playing or participating, make sure you get registered because today is the last day to sign up. You don't have to be a golfer to engage because we're doing raffle. And we are doing, so you can purchase raffle tickets online, and we're also doing a 50-50 raffle. That's cash prize to the winner. So you can purchase all those tickets online at yourchamber.com. So that's my commercial. So make sure that if you're going to participate, that is the Chamber's one fundraiser for the year for themselves. And we look forward to some active participation to help us keep doing what we do. And I want to also lastly thank our vision sponsors who are always supporting our advocacy work. And so thank you to all of you who are on the phone. And I know that Sunrise Water and WES is also a program sponsor, Miles Fiberglass. Thank you very much for your sponsorships. And let's see here. So that's it. So again, hold your questions. Please keep yourself muted. We're going to ask questions right at the tail end of the presentation, and Greg DiLoretto will offer that opportunity when he is ready to take questions. So I would love to turn this over now to our facilitator, Greg DiLoretto, Vice Chair of the Clackamas Water Environment Services Advisory Committee. Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to try to share my screen, and that should work, I hope. Yep. And go to this. There we go. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today and for allowing me and the panel the opportunity to speak with you about infrastructure, an issue that increasingly dominates the news across the country, and it has serious consequences for our nation's economy, not to mention our quality of life. I'm Greg DiLoretto. I'm past president of the American Society of Civil Engineers and chair emeritus of ASCE's Committee on America's Infrastructure. And I've been a volunteer in those roles, but I spent over 30 years in public works field as a city engineer, a public works director, and the last 14 years prior to my retirement as the chief executive for the Tuolumne Valley Water District. As I'm making my comments today, you'll probably hear the passion in my voice that I have for this topic of investing in our infrastructure and what it means to us and to our lives. As the nation's oldest engineering society, representing 150,000 civil engineers who serve as one of the stewards of infrastructure here in the US and around the globe, ASCE serves as a leading advocate for sustainable infrastructure. And as some of you may know, as a part of that advocacy, every 4 years since 1998, ASCE has prepared a comprehensive assessment of the nation's 16 major infrastructure categories in its infrastructure report card. And we use a similar familiar A to F report card format, and the report card examines current infrastructure conditions and needs. It assigns grades, and then we make recommendations on how to raise those grades. And how do we determine the grades? Well, The report card is prepared by the ASCE Committee on America's Infrastructure, which for this report card includes 32 civil engineers from around the country with expertise across 17 categories in this report card, and I'll talk about that in a minute. With ASCE staff, the committee evaluates relevant data and reports from government agencies, the private sector, nonprofits, and other organizations. We meet with technical and industry experts to gain a wider view of our nation's infrastructure. The committee then examines each category in the context of 8 key criteria before determining a grade. And those criteria include capacity, condition, funding, future need, operation and maintenance, public safety, resilience, and innovation. Now, once the 17 categories are graded, those grades are then averaged, just as was on your school report card, to determine an overall grade for the nation. And in nearly a quarter century that ASCE has been releasing the report card, unfortunately, there have only been marginal changes because of the inaction at the federal level and the backlog of needs. However, for the first time, for the 2021 report card, America's cumulative GPA is a C-. Boo, wait. This GPA has improved slightly from a D+ in 2017, indicating we've made some progress around the margins in some infrastructure areas. However, as you can see from this slide, 11 categories are still in the D range. And those include much of the infrastructure Americans interact most closely with every day, like roads and transit, which got our lowest grade at a D-, wastewater and airports. Often these categories are where we failed to make investments needed to maintain the assets that were built 50 years or longer ago. And as I mentioned, 17 categories. For 2021, we added a new category, stormwater, and its initial grade in our nation is a D. What I want to do now is spend a few moments on the categories of infrastructure that are most relevant to our purpose today: drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. Drinking water. Drinking water received a grade of C-, and that grade improved in our 2021 report card, up from a D in 2017. You know, our nation's drinking water infrastructure system is made up of over 2.2 million miles of underground pipes that deliver safe, reliable water to millions of people. The system is aging, though, and underfunded. There's a water main break every 2 minutes, and an estimated 6 billion gallons of treated drinking water is lost each day in the US. That's enough to fill over 9,000 swimming pools. The majority of funding for drinking water infrastructure comes from revenue generated by ratepayers like you and I, the users of the system. And yet we spend 4 times as much for phone and internet services as we do for water and wastewater. But the rate of improvement is increasing. It's estimated that more than 12,000 miles of water pipes were planned to be replaced by drinking water agencies across the country in 2020 alone. Utilities have gone from a replacement rate of 0.5% in 2017 to 1.5 to nearly 5% in 2021. In 2019, about a third of all drinking water utilities had a robust asset management program in place to help prioritize their capital and operations and maintenance investments with the limited dollars they have. Wastewater, the grade is a D+. That's unchanged from 2017. There are more than 16,000 wastewater treatment plants that are functioning on average at 81% of their design capacity. 15% of those facilities have reached or exceeded it. And because urban environments are growing, facilities will increasingly have to accommodate a larger portion of the nation's wastewater demand. And though large-scale capital improvements have been made to systems experiencing sanitary sewer overflows, efforts have slowed in recent years. As many treatment plants and collection networks approach the end of their lifespans, the financial responsibilities for operations and maintenance will become more costly. Estimates indicate that utilities spent over $3 billion in 2019, more than $18 per water customer to address the almost 4,700 miles of pipeline repair. As I've mentioned before when I've spoken to people in Clackamas County, the good news for us is that I can tell you that as a member of the WES Advisory Committee, WES is doing things right and much better than much of what I have seen around the country in my travels. But they too are going to need adequate funding if they are to continue providing wastewater services in a manner that protects the environment, provides for our economic prosperity and our quality of life. For stormwater, as I mentioned, for the first time, we graded stormwater utilities. And stormwater utilities are on the rise as individual separate units. But there are many challenges to better management in stormwater across the country. Impervious surfaces in cities and suburbs are expanding, exacerbating urban flooding, which results in $9 billion in damages annually. Many of the country's legacy stormwater systems are struggling with the high cost of retrofits needed to accommodate climate change. And federal funding, though in recent years averages about $250 million annually, it leaves a growing annual funding gap of $8 billion just to comply with current regulations. So the point is, these grades, along with the grades from the other 14 categories, are cause for concern and reflect the fact that America's infrastructure bill is long overdue. Now, in addition to grading the nation's infrastructure every 4 years, ASCE estimates the investment needed in each infrastructure category to maintain a state of good repair and earn a grade of B. And our most recent analysis reveals that while we've made incremental immediate gains in some infrastructure categories, our long-term investment gap continues to grow. We're still paying about half of our infrastructure bill. And the total investment gap in our nation has gone from $2.1 trillion over 10 years in our 2017 report card to nearly $2.6 trillion over 10 years today. Water, wastewater, and stormwater saw the biggest jump in needs compared to the 2017 estimate. And that's due in part to the fact we added a new category, stormwater. We are approaching or surpassing the end of service lives of our pipe network. We have a better understanding now of resilience. And finally, for the first time, we looked at what the EPA doesn't count in the needs assessment of water, wastewater, and stormwater. And even though Congress and some states have recently made efforts to invest more in infrastructure, these efforts do not come anywhere close to what is needed. We've simply failed to invest for too long, and now we're struggling to catch up. You know, after we completed our 2009 report card, we heard from elected members of Congress. They said, well, so what? America got a D in infrastructure. I still turn on the tap. Water comes out. I still drive on the roads. So what? So we commissioned an economic study on the impacts of that failing grade. What we found is failing to close this infrastructure investment gap brings serious economic consequences. According to our 2020 economic study, failure to act, if we do not close and address the infrastructure investment gap, our economy will lose $10 trillion in gross domestic product, nearly half of the annual US GDP in 2019. We'll lose more than $23 trillion in total output, primarily business sales. We'll lose more than 3 million jobs in 2039. That's 2 times the number of Walmart employees in the US. But here's the number we can all relate to, and the screen shows it. More than $3,300 in families' annual disposable income each year from 2020 to 2039, which is over half of the average American's household monthly expenditure, is lost due to America's poorly functioning or underperforming infrastructure. So what do we do to protect our economy and address this growing infrastructure investment gap? 3 things: to raise our national infrastructure grade and our grade here at home over the next 4 years to a B, a good condition. ASCE, we urge the following starting points. First, leadership and action. Smart investment will only be possible with strong leadership, decisive action, and a clear vision for our nation infrastructure. Leaders from all levels of government, the business sector, labor, nonprofit organizations have to come together. Now, while many may disagree on the Biden administration's infrastructure proposal, for the first time ever, we have a proposal that provides funding in some manner for all 17 of the categories the ASE grades. And I'll say with a little bit of pride that the president and his staff made heavy use of our report card in developing their program. We need investment. If the United States is serious about achieving an infrastructure system fit for the long future, some specific steps must be taken, beginning with increased long-term consistent investment. To close that $2.6 trillion 10-year investment gap, meet future need, and restore our global competitive advantage, we must increase investment from all levels of government and the private sector from 2.5% to 3.5% of our gross domestic product. To give you an example, back in the 60s when we were building the interstate highway system, we were spending about 4% of our gross domestic product. And that investment must be consistently and wisely allocated and must begin with the following steps. Congress should fully fund authorized programs. Congress will authorize a program and then not put any money to it. Infrastructure owners and operators must charge, and we Americans must be willing to pay the rates reflecting the true cost of using, maintaining, and improving our infrastructure. And finally, resilience. We have to utilize new approaches, materials, and technologies to ensure our infrastructure can withstand or quickly recover from natural or man-made hazards. Advancements in resilience across all infrastructure sectors must be made. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to share the 2021 report card with you today and for your interest in the backbone of our economy and our daily lives. You know, all Americans share a role in renewing our nation's infrastructure, increased interest, and recent federal actions to boost our GPA. But there's so much more work to be done to ensure we have infrastructure that's ready for the future. And you know, there's no magic wand to address this crisis, either from an infrastructure money tree or from the private sector, so often touted as the key to revitalizing infrastructure. Solving our infrastructure crisis will take collective action and tough choices. Government and the private sector must partner to close our infrastructure deficit, commit to a future in which we improve infrastructure and value it as a key to our quality of life and our economic prosperity. We simply can't afford to not to. So ASCE looks forward to working with you to help continue make infrastructure a priority for our economy and our quality of life. And I'd now like to introduce our panel. And they're going to take a few moments and introduce their agencies. We have with us today Greg Geist, who is the General Manager of the Clackamas Water Environment Services. We have Mark Knudson, a board member of the Oak Lodge Water Services District. Todd Heidgerken, who is the General Manager of the Clackamas River Water District. And Wade Hathhorn, who's the General Manager of the Sunrise Water Authority. So I'll call on each of you, and if you just take a couple of minutes, talk about some of the things, the assessments for your agency. And we'll start with Greg.
All right, thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is really important, and I greatly appreciate your being here, especially those folks on our West Advisory Committee, and I see Commissioner Schrader's here as well, which is wonderful to see on this topic. As far as West goes, I think the first thing that came to my mind when this question was called was cautiously optimistic. I think we're doing a lot of good things, and I'll start with some of that, and then move into the things that maybe keep me up at night. You know, over the past few years, we've tackled some pretty significant projects, what I would call low-hanging fruit. You know, refurbishment of our Kellogg facility in Milwaukee, adding solids handling capacity at our Tri-City facility. Those are important, and those are big infrastructure type projects. But at the same time, we've been investing in planning for the future and really understanding what those needs are going to be. Things like developing an asset management program and doing all of the condition assessments that really give us a clear picture of our existing assets, what condition they're in and when they're going to need to be replaced, and then planning for that. And also we completed a collection system master plan. So we own 360 miles of pipe, 22 pump stations, and 5 wastewater treatment facilities. So that 360 miles of pipe and 22 pump stations in our service area, we did a comprehensive master plan for that, both condition and capacity related. So we have a really good idea of what our needs are there moving into the future. In addition to that, I think, for those of you who've been around for a while, Wes, we reorganized and we created a structure with our organization, with our advisory committee, and with our governance that I really think sets us up. So we've got a lot of good things going for us. We also happen to have, over $100 million in reserves for capital funds. So now maybe I'll move into the things that keep me up at night, and that is that we have, about $250 million in our 5-year of need in our 5-year capital improvement plan. So that $100,000 in the bank, so to speak, seems like a lot, but we have a lot of needs moving forward. Also, the 5 treatment facilities that we have, we know that we're working on a plan for those that's going to give us the same kind of clarity that we have for our collection system. We don't know what that's going to tell us quite yet. We do know that we have near-term needs for expanding our wet weather capacity at our Tri-City facility, but we don't know what the price tag, depending on the regulatory requirements around that. It could be 40 million, it could be 80 million. So we're still a little bit in the dark. We're gaining clarity, but we're not quite there on some of that stuff. What else? Oh, we also know that, over the long term, those 360 miles of pipe that we have in the ground, the cities that we serve that own and operate their own collection systems that feed into our treatment plant have many more miles than that, and they leak, and so do ours. And so we know that we need to partner with the cities over the next 20 years in order to reduce the amount of capital expenditures that we're going to need. And so the level of performance that we achieve in partnership with the cities is uncertain at this point. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will hold hands and move on together and save ratepayers a lot of money. And then I guess the last thing is, we talked about rate increases, and that's always an uncertainty, especially in these recent times. So again, I think we've done a lot of the right things, maybe all of the right things, and there's certainly things that we don't know and don't have complete control over moving forward. So that's how I would characterize Wes.
Thank you, Greg. We'll move to Mark, Oak Lodge.
Great, thanks, Greg. I'm Mark Knudson. I'm a board member with Oak Lodge Water Services District. Those that are not familiar with the district, Oak Lodge provides drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater services to about 29,000 people. We're located between, kind of right along McLaughlin, between Milwaukee and Gladstone, nestled between the river and Oatfield Ridge. Been, in various capacities, myself in the drinking water industry over the last 35 years. And so I was really honored to have the opportunity to serve on the board for Oak Lodge Water Services. To try to, a snapshot of Oak Lodge right now, I would say we're in a remarkably strong position, all things considered, given what has been a remarkably difficult and challenging year. I think that's in large measure a reflection of the awesome staff that we have, several of whom have joined here today. But I'm also a little biased because I think we have an incredible board that's provided some leadership and direction that's really helped us move forward. In terms of sort of like where we are, where we're going, I think it's notable that we just completed our budget process, something that most organizations do every year. But through really active community engagement and effective public outreach, we've gone through a process that had some pretty notable belt tightening, some strategic cuts that we made, and as a result, our budget relies on a revenue forecast that assumes a 1.5% rate increase. That's just pretty much austere compared to some of the other increases that we're seeing in costs and rates for things like materials and services, labor, other consumables. And so we feel pretty positive about the fact that we're working hard to control our public's cost. In terms of infrastructure, I think we have seen a lot of significant challenges on the horizon. We just completed a drinking water master plan this last year. The good news is it really helped us set the vision and priorities for future investments. The bad news is it identified some significant capital investments that are needed to improve reliability, resiliency, and fire flow. Some of the issues that Greg talked about in his opening comments are key drivers in terms of the needs for capital investment within the drinking water system. At the same time, we're now moving forward with gearing up to complete a water sanitary system master plan, but we already know of the need to make significant investments just based on the age of the system and the condition and the need for repairs of the collection system, as well as our wastewater treatment plant. It's relatively new as infrastructure goes, but we know that it's already starting to show its age. It needs some improvements, as well as responding to some new permit requirements that are going to be especially challenging. And we really want to get all this master planning work wrapped up so that we can put together a financial plan, really a comprehensive financial plan, so that we can get a better handle on how we're going to fund these improvements and better communicate with the public in terms of what they can expect in terms of future rate impacts associated with making those improvements. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of where we are with Oak Lodge Water Services.
Thanks, Mark. We'll move to Todd with Clackamas River Water District.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Greg and Laura. Thanks for the chamber for putting this together and enjoy the opportunity to talk about a state of infrastructure. We have the state of the county and the state of cities, and so this is kind of fun to be adding on to that. As far as Clackamas River Water, some background, kind of the tail of the tape type of thing for us is we do serve about 48,000 citizens of Clackamas County through about 12,800 connections to homes, a lot of businesses, and a variety of different customers that we serve and who rely on us to provide them quality water. Just to kind of give you a sense of scale, that's roughly about 11% of the population of Clackamas County that we serve. Again, our resident or our customers are a mix of residents and businesses, primarily in the unincorporated Clackamas County area, but we do touch on a little bit in the Oregon City, Milwaukee, and also slightly in Happy Valley as well. So some of our customers do just barely reside in some of those cities as well. We're talking about infrastructure, so it's important to note what is the extent of that issue. And so for us, it's about 272 miles of pipe, all different sizes, all different conditions, all different ages, all different types of materials. That kind of makes that a challenge to manage at times. And then we have our reservoirs, which store the water within our system, and then pump stations, which, boy, we learned the importance of making sure you have a resilient pump stations during the ice storms especially, which we'll touch on probably a little bit more later. And then most of our water is produced by our water treatment plant that we have on the Clackamas River. One of the things to note is it's a great example of aging infrastructure. We're approaching that water treatment plant is going to be about 65 years old here coming up, and they don't last forever, unfortunately. So I think another unique thing about Clackamas River Water is we're actually the formation of a number of small districts that had come together over a number of decades, and so that provides its own unique challenges where sometimes through those processes you don't get the state-of-the-art type of system. So sometimes you inherit things that are going to require that future investment and repairs in the future. The last merger or consolidation of districts happened in 1995 with the consolidation of, at that point, the Clackamas River or Clackamas Water District that was north of the Clackamas River, and then the Claremont Water District, which was south of the Clackamas River. So we've since been operating as Clackamas River Water since 1995. And then, there's all sorts of different growth pressures within Clackamas County, but for us, for our service territory, we actually don't anticipate a whole lot of growth given the areas that we serve. And so we figure that provides its own unique challenges as it relates to you're not building things to serve a lot of additional growth in the future in our instance. And so that that requires us to work with our existing customers and ratepayers as we move forward. Folks have been sharing a little bit about some of what keeps them up at night, or what are those challenges. And you know, I think it's important to note that we all recognize that this emphasis on investing in our infrastructure is critical. And frankly, it's nice at least that it's such a high priority as far as discussion, not only on the national level, but more locally as well. For CRW, it's captured in our mission, the importance of that, and more specifically in one of our strategic goals, where we want to ensure a reliable water supply for our communities that we serve by investing in infrastructure and emergency preparedness. And this is something that just came out of our new strategic planning process that was conducted about a year ago. And in pulling or following through with that, we've recently completed over $30 million of investment in infrastructure projects. And now we're actually proposing as part of our budget to make increases as far as our investments in our normal capital improvement program. And by normal, I mean those are the things that are more routine repair and replacement type programs. And then also preparing us for that next significant investment that will need to be made. As far as challenges, I think you've heard a lot about it already. It's part of Greg's presentation and so on, is just the aging infrastructure. I've mentioned we have a water treatment plant that's 65 years old or approaching that. They don't last forever. Pipes don't last forever. And so we have benefited greatly off of investments that were made many, many decades ago. And unfortunately, those investments are wearing out. Think of it as the roof on your house eventually needs to be replaced, or something needs to be upgraded or remodeled. It's no different for water and wastewater systems as well. And then we've learned a lot about resilience and the importance of resilience. I mean, I mentioned, you know, the ice storm and the importance of backup power and access to being able to operate in all sorts of different conditions. So I know we've oftentimes talked about the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake or some significant event like that, but the truth is that we are oftentimes experiencing smaller events that have real impacts on us that, frankly, if we prepare well for those, that will help us prepare for those future challenges, larger challenges as well. And wildfires, COVID, you name it. It was a rather interesting, challenging year as it related to making sure our system is resilient. So I think those are kind of the areas that I wanted to touch on today a little bit.
Thank you, Todd. And now we'll go to Wade with Sunrise Water Authority.
Thanks, Greg. The nice thing about going last is I get to play on all the other things that were made as comments as part of this. Let me first, though, give you a little introduction to what Sunrise is and who they serve. Sunrise is one of the only urbanized water authorities in the state of Oregon, and it's organized just a little different than a special district, but you can still think of it as a single-purpose district that does drinking water as its service, essentially. And we serve customers throughout the city of Happy Valley, surrounding unincorporated portions of Clackamas County, out into what was at one point the city of Damascus, right? The city of Damascus no longer exists, but it goes all the way out into there. So we essentially serve drinking water from I-205 out to about 250th Avenue, running eastbound, essentially north and south between the county line, between Multnomah County and Clackamas County, down to essentially almost to Highway 212 as it extends along that same sort of direction, east and west. We bump up against and share boundaries a lot with CRW, so we have been doing a lot of things together. We do a lot of cooperation with them. I think that's a very unique thing that hasn't been mentioned in here about that leadership. We try to take advantage of each other's resources and share those as much as we can. Going it alone, I think that's a good message to be put on the table here that has been brought up. Going alone on the infrastructure side is very difficult. When we all want to have our own, it becomes much more expensive than it is when we want to do it together. And so that's a very important part of this. Sunrise, unlike maybe the other parties that were talked about here, one of the unique things about Sunrise, we are growing between 2.5% and 3% a year. If you've ever been out to see Happy Valley, all you need to do is just go out there a week later and it's changed dramatically. It is growing rapidly as it basically moves to the east and begins to take up some of that unincorporated areas that were originally slated for development with the former city of Damascus, and growth as it expands all north and south up along Southeast 172nd. So growth is a big deal that we're dealing with. We spend as much time dealing with the growth and new capacity requirements on our system as we do looking at renewal and replacement projects, both of which are extremely important for us as part of that process. So like the other agencies, the assets we own are broad and deep, and I mean deep in some cases, literally, right? We have some 235 miles of pipe, 11 storage reservoirs, and 16 pump stations. And I think for the general public to understand the age of infrastructure, it's important to realize that these drinking water systems are moving water around, and moving water is a very difficult thing to do. Think about it. We're using technology essentially that was developed around in the 20s. We're using pumps and so on and so forth. Pipes are doing that. Things have changed. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of other great additions that had happened, especially on the treatment side. But moving and delivering water for the principal purpose of how it's done hasn't really changed for almost 100 years, essentially, right? And much of the assets that are important to us are buried. You never see them. They just happen. You happen to walk up to your tap in the morning, turn the water on, and it just works. You flush your toilet, and many people don't even know that the water in their toilet that they're flushing down the toilet itself is the same water that comes into their drinking water system in their home, right? So there's a lot happens that you don't see that are really important, and that's those assets that we're talking about that have to be maintained. The ones that are probably more critical and aging, as we talk about, are the mechanical ones that we use to move water around, like pumps, like treatment plants, and those kinds of things are the ones that are now taking a lot of our focus. But I also want to put on the table one of the things that we're talking about, and it's a term that's commonly used in our profession, but it's to avoid run to failure. And that's what we're really trying to do. We don't, we take great pride in making sure that your service is never disrupted. And we try to do so on our planning, but that's not how it always works. We do get main breaks. We do get, failures to the mechanical systems. And we're trying as best as we can to try to stay far enough away from that run to failure line as we can without imposing extreme economic, demands on our customers, because this stuff is very expensive and it gets very expensive every year. And it's never going to get cheaper. And that is one of the problems. So this isn't necessarily, as Greg pointed out, a plea for money, although priorities, I think, within the government, especially the federal government, are extremely important. There's also, good leadership and good planning that all of my colleagues have pointed out are very important, as well as collaborating together so that we can solve the common problems that we face every day. So the general public doesn't have to worry about it. That's really our mission and goal as part of that process. But there are some extreme challenges to make that happen.
Thanks, Wade. Greg, you mentioned this $250 million need that your organization has. Can you just take a moment and tell us where the money will come from for these big capital projects and how you fund your operations?
Sure, I'll try. Just a broad overview. So our revenue comes from three places: the monthly rates that we charge homes and businesses, the system development charges that we charge developers when someone wants to connect to our system, and those are tiered based on the impact of that entity on our system. So there's single home versus a Fred Meyer with a bakery that we would charge accordingly. And then a very small fraction comes from fees that we charge for things like plan review and to oversee some of the industrial permits that we regulate. And then those rates that we collect, the revenue that we collect, primarily goes to fund operations. That's the people, that's the electricity, that's the chemicals, everything it takes to keep our treatment plants and collection system running. A portion of that also goes to debt service. So Wes has about a $14 million annual debt service that's covered, actually by a combination of rates and SDCs. And then construction funds. So what we have left at the end of the year, that's how we built up that pretty significant reserve that we have, is we take money collected through rates and SDCs and fold that into our construction funds. So essentially operations is funded by those monthly charges. And then the infrastructure piece, depending if it's related to growth, then we can use that system development charge pot of money to pay for it. Many of our projects aren't 100% just maintenance or replacement. Often they have a component of growth. So any given large capital project will have a combination of rate-based money, borrowing, and SDCs in combination to pay for those. And recently we made a change to our financial policies that allow us to use those SDCs to fund debt service on those growth-related projects. So it's kind of a mishmash, rates, SDCs, and cash.
Thanks, Greg. So Wade, is there a difference from how you fund drinking water over what Greg talked about in the wastewater and stormwater side of it?
No, it's principally the same way. We rely on the same general funding sources that Greg talked about, primarily rates, and as well the system development charges. He talked about our connection fees for new connections, and I talked about how important those were to Sunrise, as well as the general administrative fees that are charged for various operations that go on as part of that. But the largely it just comes from our biggest source of money comes from rates, and that's the biggest piece of it, along with the system development charges. That's the biggest piece of it.
Thank you. So Todd, what role does community engagement play in educating the public on the importance of water infrastructure needs?
Well, frankly, this is probably an area that we can do better in my opinion, where obviously community engagement is going to be critical if we're going to be successful in the future in kind of further having folks understand the challenges that are out there, and not only understanding it from a need perspective, but also I think maybe doing a better job of making sure that our community understands the role that a water system or a wastewater system has, where the importance of enhancing our public health, the importance of contributing to the vitality of our communities and supporting economic growth, which again, these are all concepts that are incorporated in CRW's strategic plan and one of our strategic goals. I think, as everybody's talked about, we're supported by rates. And so it's very important that our ratepayers, the folks that we're asking to pay for this, recognize the value that we're trying to provide. I mean, nobody wants their rates to go up. Nobody's excited about that. But hopefully, if people understand the importance, what we're trying to accomplish, the long-term benefits of doing that, hopefully that is something that folks will be more supportive as we move forward. And then I appreciated, some of the stuff that Wade was sharing as far as let's try to figure out also how can we be creative and working together to create some of those efficiencies. And I think, Sunrise and Clackamas River Water, one example was we had a chance to develop a jointly constructed reservoir that benefits both of our organizations. And so the cost savings associated with that was significant as opposed to each entity doing it on their own. How we coordinate with the county on transportation projects. A lot of our pipes are in county right-of-ways or city right-of-ways, and so making sure that we're doing an effective job in coordinating that. That's another opportunity. So I think the proof is one, creating a definite understanding, making sure that people understand the value that we're trying to provide associated with that, and then also having some good examples of where we are trying to be efficient with how we proceed with things. I think last. One of our challenges, and Wade mentioned this, is our infrastructure is kind of out of sight, out of mind. This is not a road project where you can see the potholes and experience them and so on. Chances are, if you're experiencing an issue associated with a leak or a main break, that's not a good thing. But the fact is there's a lot of things that are taking place underground that we're trying to address that may not be as obvious to the general public and ratepayers.
Thanks, Todd. So Mark, you occupy a unique position here on our panel. You're our only elected official. So from that perspective, why do you think it's important that we invest in our infrastructure?
You've heard it a lot today, but I'd be remiss to not really emphasize the point that drinking water, wastewater, stormwater services are essential lifelines for our community. They support the public health, public safety, and I think it often gets overlooked, the economy and the vital economic interests of our communities. And I think you only need to look to like Texas or Jackson, Mississippi in this last year to really see the tragic impacts that can happen by failing to plan and invest in these essential lifeline services for our communities. I mean, the good news is we weren't on the headlines in this last year, but that speaks to the importance of the investments in planning and infrastructure reinvestments that are so key to what it is that we do. These, you've heard over and over again this afternoon how expensive these systems are, and that really necessitates a long-term view, some really effective planning, hopefully a pretty sharp crystal ball to figure out what the future looks like. Todd provided the analogy of, it's like your house. You have to make ongoing investments in maintenance, but what gets lost, I think, is in the case of Oak Lodge, many of the assets that we are responsible for are over 50 and in many cases 60 and 70 years old, that they're rapidly approaching the end of their economic lives. What do I mean by economic life? Well, it turns out we get to the point where it costs more to go out and maintain and repair and fix the damage from the failure of these systems than it does to go out and in a timely and planned basis, go out and replace them. So in a nutshell, the way I see it as an elected official is we've been living off the investments that our grandparents made in these systems 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that's really been effective in helping us keep rates low for the last, couple generations. But now it's our turn to step up and make those generational investments to meet not only the current needs of public health, public safety, and the economy of our communities, but also to address the future in terms of making sure that our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren have access to the same kind of resources to meet the needs of the community in the future. I mean, the good news is that we have tools like asset management that allow us to optimize how we make those investments. We have better planning tools than existed 50 years ago that allow us to accurately right size and time those investments. So there's a lot we can do to keep those costs very efficient and invest in a way that hopefully spreads those costs out over time. But to me, the big challenge is those problems are not going away on their own. It's really time for our generation to step up and start making those investments in the future to preserve the health and safety of our communities.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I know we're getting closer to our ending feast, but I have, we're here with the business community. So really the question we need to ask them is ask you folks, our panel here, what can your business partners do to help you succeed as a successful agency? And I'll start with Mark again. What can they do to help you?
Well, first of all, just being here is greatly appreciated, and increasing the awareness. What is it? Awareness is the first step. And that's really a key part of this whole conversation. And the second is sharing that with your peers and expressing that, we are an integral part of the long-term financial success of the community. And to that end, your support is truly appreciated. And the only other piece I would add, because I know the other members of the panel have great ideas, is please don't flush the flushable wipes. They are devastating on the system. And to that end, they really aren't flushable. Don't believe what it says on the package.
Thanks, Mark. Todd, what can you tell our business community?
Well, I think continuing dialogue is important. And so this is why I'm appreciative of opportunities like this to kind of share what's taken place. But I want to encourage folks to reach out. If there are questions or concerns of what's taken place, to reach out to your provider so that we can be engaging. And then obviously I want to encourage all of us as providers to do a better job in reaching out to our communities as well. Really, we're looking for partners in this process. We recognize that these are difficult asks in many instances because of where we're at in the sequence of the aging infrastructure and those needs. But the unfortunate part is ignoring the problem only makes it worse in the future and more expensive in the future. And so it's that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And it truly is, we want to try to continue to show progress as we move forward. So having partners in that process is important.
Thanks, Todd. Greg, from your perspective?
Sure, I agree with what Mark and Todd said. I also would observe that, as utility leaders, we have a lot of responsibility. And I think it's really important that we demonstrate good stewardship. And so we invest in the planning. And when we bring infrastructure needs to the table, that it's well-reasoned, that it's, that it's needed, and that we get that information out into the community, which is kind of what we're trying to do today. So I think holding us accountable to that standard is important. And then I'll just observe, to the extent that people can get involved, I'm so appreciative of our Citizen Advisory Committee at WES having such a high-powered group of people and being as engaged as they are, because at the end of the day, I'm a bureaucrat and I'm going to my governing body, sorry, Martha, asking for a rate increase. And to the extent that we have these community and business leaders informed and supportive, it makes our job so much easier. So I appreciate your participation here today. And if you want to know how to get more involved with WES, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thanks, Greg. And Wade, from your perspective in a fast-growing area.
Yeah, our biggest one is just, as Todd and others have pointed out, is just understanding, getting engaged is really important as part of this process, because the support of the business community is a vital interest to a public agency. We're not normally operating within the normal sectors of business itself. Essentially, we have a business, but it centers around, focused on those citizens and other aspects of priorities. And as much as we attempt to try to engage and have that as part of a process, we really need that business community to become part of what we do. That's really important. And the ways to do that is to participate. I would love to have some of the business community on for instance, my budget committee every year, so they understood how we spent that money, how it was generated, if they had questions. But frankly, we don't see people show up at water district meetings. They just don't, right? And if people want to really understand what happens with one of these public agencies, get involved. We encourage you to do that. We like sharing what we do with the public, but more importantly, we really like sharing what we do with business because it makes a difference. You are always on our mind, I can tell you that.
Thanks, Wade. Well, I'm going to turn the program back over to Laura. I left a couple of minutes for questions, and Laura, I'm turning it back over to you, and the panel will be available to answer some questions we have either from you or from our audience members. I'll turn it back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. What great, what an important conversation today. And I will start us out with a question, and I know Ed Gronke will ask your question second. So mine is about water scarcity. It's really becoming more prevalent in Oregon, and even in Clackamas County, conservation measures are becoming the norm during what typically, what would typically be wet weather months. With that in mind, what role does recycled water play in the future of building and more resilient water systems? And is our infrastructure ready for that? Whoever wants to take that question, please do so.
Well, I guess I can speak to maybe partly to the recycled water portion. When WES recently completed a facility upgrade in 2011 that gave us the ability to send water out into what we call purple pipes that can be used out in the community for irrigation and toilet flushing and things like that. But what we found is that we haven't reached that point yet. Water's just still too plentiful and too inexpensive in Oregon to get much legs, at least for our program or desires around distribution of that water. and we're actively working now with the, I'll butcher the name, but the Pacific Northwest Water Reuse Council, to try to get engaged in that community and see what, and just keep our foot in the door and see what we can do, because it is, with additional restrictions for discharges into rivers and future regulatory requirements, we definitely see it as a tool in our toolbox. It's just not, haven't figured out how to use it yet.
I'd just make a quick addition. One of the big fundamental challenges is the need to have a separate distribution system, so you can add on the ability to process that water at the end of a wastewater treatment plant, but then you have to take it somewhere. And there are ideal settings where maybe you can deliver it to a park or a golf course, and that makes it pretty easy to dispose of that reclaimed wastewater. But to distribute it through the community requires construction of an entirely separate system. We have a hard enough time maintaining the pipes that we have, much less building an entirely separate parallel system for reclaimed wastewater.
Laura, this is Wade. I just quickly add, so I don't extend this conversation too long. Sunrise is one of the few public agencies within the Portland metropolitan area that have a purple pipe system we're talking about. We were in certain portions of our system. We don't have it everywhere. We have it where the new development is going in. Sunrise was pretty visionary many years ago, requiring the new development to place that in, with the notion that at some point, many years in the future, that will be in fact one of the options that have to be on the table, and you have to have infrastructure to doing it. And as they pointed out, the best time to do it is now, when you're building a new space versus trying to go in and retrofit it for purple pipe. It can be very expensive, almost prohibitive to make that happen.
Great feedback. Thank you all for answering that question for me. And I'd have comments, but we're going to keep going with some of the other questions. Aren't all the water systems he says intertied, but intertwined? I believe the wastewater systems are not, correct? That's a question, audience question.
So I'd love to take a first crack at this, because the short answer is there are some very limited capacity connections between some of the systems, and there are some parts of some systems that are intertied, but it's not a universal statement that says all systems are intertied. And those interties lack in capacity to be able to sort of move water from any system to any system. So one of the things that was identified in Oak Lodge's water system master plan was the need to establish just that kind of intertie. And so we're now currently actively working with CRW, Todd and his team, as well as the city of Milwaukee, to look at how we can make those kind of improvements that would allow us to move water in either direction to serve either of those partner systems. But again, these are very large investments to meet the reliability needs of multiple communities. The good news is working together as partnerships allows us to spread those costs over a larger group of people.
So if I could, Laura, I'll piggyback on. I think the ice storm was a great example of the fact that of the importance of those interties, and where you do have the ability for the 3 of the water treatment plants on the lower portion of the Clackamas River water. So the Clackamas River water plant, the South Fork Water Board plant, and the North Clackamas County Water Commission plant. Those 3 do have the ability to kind of push water around to different entities, and that became critical during the ice storm, when we were all kind of rotating through who had power, who didn't have power, who had the ability to run. And so I'm a big fan of trying to figure out how do you improve your resiliency by creating those connections, because we all get impacted different ways. So we're gonna have different capabilities.
Thank you, Todd. And I do want to give you guys a shout out, because I know that you guys worked very collaboratively through the ice storm and the situation that we all lived through this last winter. So I do want to say thanks to all of you for collaborating on such a high level to be able to keep water moving. That actually, so a couple questions for me, but one in particular is with the proposed America's Recovery Fund, the ARPA funds that are coming out in the fall. A lot of that is coming down into the cities, the county, the state. And from what I've read so far, I understand it can be used for infrastructure projects like this. So is that monies that you guys are going to be reaching out to try to get and maybe build out a pool from your different cities and county to be able to expand some of this infrastructure build out that's necessary?
Oh, this is kind of one of those sore subjects for me, sorry. As a special district, we actually are not part of that. And so the only way we can get funding is actually to get allocation from the state. And frankly, the approach that the state is using really doesn't afford an opportunity for special districts to access that funding. And so now counties and cities are many of them get direct allocation as a result of that. And so they're in a much better position for that. So although I would love to say yes, especially given the fact that that's a primary purpose, unfortunately, that isn't going to be available to all of us water providers.
Okay.
I would just say, so for the county, the Board of County Commissioners put together a team to kind of develop a framework and advise them on where to send that ARPA money. And so I am part of that team and part of that conversation. Whether ultimately that money finds its way to a West project, I can't say at this time. But we also have, coming behind that, the big infrastructure pile of money. So we'll have to see where it goes. We're certainly aware and involved, and I've got my hand out.
Todd explained ARPA from my perspective, and again, it's special districts aren't in line. In terms of a longer term infrastructure package, I think it's also important to recognize that as we've heard recently, most of that will largely show up in the form of long-term loans as opposed to outright grants. And so those long-term loans still need to be repaid, and that generally translates to some kind of cost to the local community. And so it speaks to the importance of doing the kind of planning that we're talking about to identify the infrastructure needs and priorities, and then having a financial plan in place to understand how you're actually going to pay for that over time.
Okay, and that makes sense. Well, and the reason I was asking that, of course, is because then how does the business community come in and support the special districts in these asks when money is being, filtered down from the feds into the state? Because eventually we will pay taxes on it anyways, right? So I guess the question is as a business organization such as the chambers statewide, how do we engage in that conversation to be more supportive, to be able to get the funds to help support these infrastructure projects? So we can talk offline about that separately, Todd, Mark, and then go from there. Of course, we're already working with Greg and his team at West. So I know we're running out of time. It's 1:06. I want to be respectful, but we did get started a little bit late. Does anybody have one last question for the panel that you did not have the chance to ask yet? I have a dozen questions, but we're out of time. So any last minute? And if not, we will let this wonderful panel adjourn. All right. So I want to say thank you all very much. A special thanks again back to Shelley Perini Runji for putting together this panel. Thank you very much for your devotion to our community. I want to thank Greg DiLoretto, representing Water Environment Services here today. Mark Knudson with Oak Lodge Water District Board member. Thank you, Mark. Greg Geist, Director of Clackamas Water Environment Services. Always a great partner, Greg. Thank you. Todd Heidgerken, sorry, I'm going to get that wrong, General Manager with Clackamas River Water. Thank you, Todd. And Wade Hathhorn, General Manager, Sunrise Water Authority. Thank you all today for the conversation. There's a lot yet to do. We're here to help support you in any way that we can as the North Clackamas Chamber and your business advocate. And I thank you all. We'll share this recording with our community, and you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Thank you.